And for the first hour of the show, I want to talk about Pope Francis, but in a slightly different way, perhaps, because one of the last people to see the Pope alive was, of course, JD Vance. And the Vatican reported back that the talks between them had been cordial in tone, but there'd been an exchange of opinions on the international situation, especially regarding countries affected by war, political tensions, and difficult humanitarian situations, with particular attention to migrants, refugees, and prisoners. In a letter to Catholic bishops in the US in February, the Pope described the mass deportations taking place in the States as a major crisis that was damaging the dignity of many men and women. I'm just going to share with you a quote from that letter now. The Pope says, Jesus Christ, loving everyone with a universal love, educates us in the permanent recognition of the dignity of every human being without exception. In fact, when we speak of infinite and transcendent dignity, we wish to emphasize that the most decisive value possessed by the human person surpasses and sustains every other juridical consideration that can be made to regulate life in society. Thus, all the Christian faithful and people of goodwill are called upon to consider the legitimacy of norms and public policies in the light of dignity of the person and his or her fundamental rights, not vice versa. And this was, if you read the entire letter, a pretty explicit way of calling out what the US administration were doing by deporting people without trial and going after undocumented migrants. Francis also sought to rebut JD Vance's claims that the US government's actions were justified by a concept from medieval Catholic theology. The vice president had invoked this concept to suggest that there was something called a hierarchy of care. And Francis said in response to that, Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interest that little by little extend to other persons and groups. The true ordo amoris must be promoted, and that is that we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan, meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. This is a big thing to do, to go against the Trump administration in that way. And during a visit to Mexico in February, 9 months before the election that gave Trump his first term, Pope Francis actually talked about this whole concept of building a wall, which you'll remember was a big part of the platform on which Trump won his first presidency. He said, a person who thinks only about building walls, wherever they may be, and not of building bridges, is not a Christian. And this got me thinking, because Trump, I think, realised that it would be a bit much for him to pretend to be a practicing Christian. I don't think that he thought that people would believe that. But he does attempt to speak for Christians, I think, a lot of the time. He has allied himself with Christianity and as a friend of the Christian church. And JD Vance is a practicing Catholic. And I wonder, if you are a Christian yourself, what you think of your faith being co-opted in this way. Because I imagine if I was a Christian, which I'm not, full disclosure, but I have studied the Bible, and I do think that Jesus was a dude with a lot of value to say. I think if I was a Christian, I would be really, really annoyed by that. And certainly from the things that Pope Francis said throughout his life, it seems that he was.